thank you very much, everyone, for being here. First, unscripted question. So what did you think about the keynote before? All right, yeah. Radical candor feedback, please.
I think he touched upon a lot of problems we all probably faced at different parts of our career. And I keep hearing a lot of questions from like engineers and managers and more around career path. I'm going to start referring to Randall's slides going forward.
Cool. And any other feedback? Any other feedback? What do you disagree on?
I like the hat.
You like the hat?
Yeah.
You disagree on the hat or you agree on the hat?
I agree on the hat.
You agree on the hat?
It's good for the brand.
Okay. So what do you disagree on? Huh. Good job. What do you agree on?
Well, I was going to say, I think maybe a slight disagree, but more a supplement. So for context, I spent most of my career at Facebook and Stripe, where we don't have any public titles. So I always find it fascinating listening to talks like this, because personally, I've just never worked deeply in an environment where we have the senior and the senior staff. And so many of our ladders look sort of like this, where there's the implementer, the solver, the finder. The one thing I really liked the talk, but one thing I kind of you could add is the sort of the dimension of scale of problem. So there's sort of, for a problem of a certain size, there's the implementer, the solver, and the finder. But the size of the problem can grow in like huge amounts of scale. And so I feel like the Jeff Dean is really the almost like defining industry level problems. And I think that's another way you can kind of amp up the levels in your ladder.
Thomas?
What I'll add, I think it's a good model. I really like it. There's one concept that we spent a lot of time on was the concept of solution engineering versus problem engineering. And I think it can be very easy to think about solutions and get attached to solutions as you're working through things. And it's much more useful to attach yourself and own problems versus owning solutions. So a good example of this is like you find the right rule engine that you want to build, you give it a name, and you say, hey, this is our solution, and you get attached to the solution, and then you realize you don't even know what problem you're solving 6 months into the project. So the idea of like orienting around problems is really important. So one potential thing to add is even as a solution implementer, to have solution implementers that are still attached to the problem they're solving is really, really important, because if you just have the solution, you can use the solution for a lot of different problems, and then you can lose sight of what you were trying to solve.
Yeah, okay. All right, Randall, you will have the chance to tell what you disagree on what they say tonight afterwards. All right, cool. So I'm going to talk about 3 different topics tonight, so 3 topics. First topic is going to be about providing paths that suit different people. So we all know about the different tracks. It's pretty common here, the IC track, the management track. And Medium took this and multiplied this by 8. So it has 16 tracks, so much more than this. So there is a lot of different tracks for different people at Medium, and you define this pretty well. You have the building, the executing track, the supporting, the strengthening. Can you tell me a bit more about this?
Yeah, so 16 tracks. It's different than the classic dual track that we see. And what we did is we asked engineers, how do you provide value? And we were expecting to get things just like, well, we code. But we got a whole bunch of other things, like recruiting, like evangelizing, writing blogs, mentoring, helping out with processes. And we took a look, and we didn't want to put people into just one of these 2 tracks of you're an IC or you're a manager. We created 16 to kind of capture all of these different things that we thought engineers provided value.
Interesting.
And we allow them to progress along any of these tracks. And yeah, your primary role might be a group lead, is what we call engineering manager. But you can also be a group lead who's very good in the mobile track.
So you can be in several tracks.
You can be in several tracks, and you can progress along several tracks.
How many tracks can you be? in?
Oh, we have people who are in like 8 or 10.
8 to 10?
Yeah.
So they're really...
Yeah, because the 16 they're pretty, there's a wide varied skills that are in there. Like recruiting. Everyone helps out with recruiting. So you can get some points in there. We have this whole point system. A lot of people write blogs. A lot of people run meetings. A lot of people do project management because they're a tech lead. There's specific ones for engineering managers like coaching and career development. But we find people in about 8 or 10, depending on if they're like more IC focused or more group lead focused.
The more you're junior, the less you have, or is it?
You have a lot of breadth at the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, so you get like 1 point for showing up at team events and participating and asking questions, because we want to encourage that.
Okay, so you have 1 track for events, for Plato events. Thomas, have you seen something similar at Box or Checker?
Yeah, so the one thing I'll add to that is one of the important things that we spend a lot of time on. We're right now at Checker, we're building the rubrics, and one of the things that was really important to us is to actually layer in your cultural values into the rubric and make sure you're thoughtful about that. And that goes kind of extending what Brian was talking about with like recruiting and evangelism. If you don't actually include kind of the culture as part of the rubric, then it can give people kind of a sense of like, okay, what am I actually expected to do? So we actually try to tie the cultural values directly into the rubric so people kind of live the culture and it's not just some statements that are separate.
How many engineers at Checker now?
We have 40 on the
40?
engineering
And how many at
It's
Medium?
about 40.
40? So you might have the 16 tracks at Medium, don't you? We're going to talk about it afterwards.
We definitely looked at it as part of our process.
Cool.
So,
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So Sue, titles matter. That's what you told me. It's really important to have the right titles. When you joined Zusk, at some point there were kind of a problem with titles. People were can have a. Can you tell me a bit more about this?
Yeah, when I joined Zusk, we had about 6 or 7 directors and like 10 managers. We are engineering team is about 50 people, so that was a lot of management overhead for such a small team. And it boiled down to a simple fact that if people did a good job as an individual contributor, they got promoted to a manager. And if they did an excellent job, they got promoted to a director. And they didn't really know how to operate at that level, so then what would they do? The thing that they are really good at, solve engineering problems. And then they would feel stressed out about it because they had to do additional management work too, along with IC work. So when I spoke to each of them, what I found is some of them cared a lot about titles because it sounded fancy, but then what they really wanted to do was what they're good at. So we sort of flattened that out, looked at everyone, and then I talked to a lot of people on what they wanted to do. So one of the engineers, he really wanted a director title because he felt he enjoyed management a little bit, and he didn't want to give that up. But he didn't want to do it anymore now, but just in case he would ever do that in the next 10 years, something like that. So I said, okay, what title do you want? Like, he wanted a director title, but he really wanted to be an IC. So there are things like this where people want to be an IC, but they want to have a title that's fancy. So what we said is, titles will make it very flexible. It's between you and your manager. As long as you both agree it makes sense, and it's not like CEO of a company where you can have everyone calling themselves CEO. It's okay. We'll make that happen.
So titles matter. Do you agree? Titles matter? Do they matter?
They matter. So the level matters.
The level matter.
Yes.
What's the difference?
So the level is, so at Medium, we use the level to figure out compensation. And for a particular level, everyone has the same compensation, the same salary. The titles can be slightly different, and that's an external thing. And we say you could be these 3 things. You could be an architect, a principal, or a staff engineer. We don't really care. But internally, it's very important that everyone, the public level, the level is public.
The level is public.
It's known.
So it's not the case at Stripe, isn't it? Is it? So, Raylene, I can see in your website, so Stripe has very few titles, and we don't share promotion publicly. After a few years, your LinkedIn might not look as tricked out as your peers at other companies. So that's the case at Stripe.
Yeah, so I believe you're reading from our public principles that we share to actually all candidates. You can read them online. So Stripe doesn't have official titles, and we actually have private levels. So if you're a member of the engineering team, you're either an engineer or you're an engineering manager if you've chosen the management track. So it's a dual track system. So kind of similar to what you're saying, there's sort of a bifurcation. We use levels as a compensation and performance management tool. So they're known between the manager and the person themselves, and they're used in performance conversations, promotions, raises, and all of that. Titles are actually there are no official titles of the company, but they're used in external conversations. So one thing that's pretty interesting and neat about Stripe is a lot of engineers are actually in user meetings. So you'll be sitting in a user meeting with like the head of payments at kind of a large company somewhere, and we'll bring the engineer, and that engineering manager or the engineer might want to put a title next to their name in order to kind of facilitate the conversation. So you might say like engineering lead on global payment methods, something like that. But those titles are almost used exclusively to explain your role and for external conversations, and they're not really used internally at all.
So the levels are not public, the titles are, obviously. So titles are for more external, right, and level are more internal, right? So level and not public, why that?
So there's a variety of reasons for that. Levels were first introduced maybe a little over 2 years ago when there were just about 100 engineers at Stripe. So part of the reason was starting with private levels. It was actually a cultural decision. It was, one of our values is doing whatever is necessary. We have engineers who do quite a wide range of work, like talking to users, large and small problems, mentoring others. And so part of it was not wanting to peg people's sense of the types of projects they could work on based on a level that you were given and that was publicly known within the company. So we started off just from the very beginning having private levels. Since then, we've kept that decision. I think it's something that can always be revisited as an engineering organization grows. But right now, there are no plans to change that. They remain private.
Okay, but not only they are public, the levels at Medium, but you open source everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's completely different approach, is it?
The problem with private levels is that people talk.
People talk.
And so some people know the levels and some people don't.
Yeah.
So there's an inefficiency in the system where some people they have more knowledge than others, and that leads to bad behavior.
Have you experienced some problem about that at Stripe, or?
What do you mean by the bad behavior?
So if some people know the levels and some people don't, then you get this person is this, well, how do you know that? Well, because this person told me, and this one. And so we get that kind of rumor thing going, and we just say, well, forget it. Like, all the levels are public, fully transparent, so everyone knows. So everyone has equal information, and so they know where they stand.
But transparency is also a value of Stripe, right? I've heard about the CEO who was publicly opening all his inbox, isn't it? Like, maybe it was at the time, maybe not anymore, but at the time, it was something that is really strong at Stripe, isn't it?
Right. So you're referring to email transparency, which is a little bit of a different thing. Most emails that get sent at Stripe are CC'd to a public list. So you can actually, it's pretty neat actually. You can look up, notes from a meeting with a user from 2 years ago. You can actually go look up and see what happened. And anyone in the company, most of the lists are default public. But there are private emails for sensitive issues. If I'm sending my one-on-one notes to somebody, I won't CC that to a public list. To your question, though, to the bad behavior, I think you're right. There's something to people who may share that information or who may have access to that information. Either they've been at the company longer, they just have more friends, they just talk to each other. I think the kind of question I was poking at are what are the consequences of that? So I think, the negative consequences could be there's sort of this asymmetric information around salary, and it might give people different negotiating leverage, or it might lead to discrepancies in salary, right?
Yes.
So I think I do want to separate that because I think people talk, but by having them be private, they're not a public topic of discussion. So there's not something we discuss actively. That said, internally within the management team and kind of HR and compensation, we care a ton about equal pay for equal work and really try to do a lot to calibrate the levels. So there's actually weeks of calibration every performance review cycle to assess that people feel like they're in the right levels. And when we do that, we do kind of say internally, if tomorrow all the levels were to be public, how would we feel about the results? And I think that's kind of the barometer for the management team. But it's a choice to remove it as a topic of conversation for all of engineering.
Tomasu, which side are you on?
So the thing I'll add is that I think for titles and compensation transparency, you have to figure out what problem you're trying to solve with each of them. So some companies will use titles for recognition. Some companies will use it as an external kind of indicator of the position and give clarity around what the person is doing. And so once you figure out what problem you're solving, then you'll pick a solution, and that solution will have trade-offs. And so when I was at Box, we had titles be public. So everyone knew each other's titles in this software track and the management track. But we also cared about making sure that people didn't use titles as a way to get status or access to meetings or got distracted by that. So that's something we solved in terms of the culture and the way that we evaluated the leaders in the company that were the role models that other people look up to. So if your leaders are modeling the behavior where titles don't matter, you can have public titles and avoid that problem. So I think the advice I would give is that there's going to be a company that has every permutation of all the things we're talking about. So the key thing is be very clear of what problem you want to solve with public or private titles, understand the trade-off, and make sure you're working on that trade-off as something that you're solving for your company. Because you're going to see very successful companies that have public titles, transparent compensation, transparent leveling. So it's the mix of your implementation of title and rubrics and your culture and how your leaders behave that kind of makes a company successful and makes it a great place to work or an okay place to work.
Currently at Zeus, the levels are private and titles are public, but I'm trying to change that to have levels be public as well, because the goal is people want to know how to grow, and managers should be able to coach them to saying, okay, this is what you need to do to get there, and it'll also help out, it'll help them actually see a clear career path and help managers to be able to coach them better. So I'm for making levels public.
The public, all right. Who is in the audience thinks that levels should be public? Private? Okay. Here we go. All right, so I have a side question for each single one of you. So you all have been working a lot on building the engineering career ladder in your company. What has been the number one mistake you've been doing implementing that in your company? Who wants to go first? So you are going to. What's the biggest mistake you've done? So they don't do it, obviously, or at least they know they're doing a mistake, or maybe it's different context, but whatever. What do you think? Who wants to start?
I'll start with two mistakes. One is when we first rolled out at Box, when we first rolled out the management and engineer track rubrics, we would put them side by side, and the assumption and connotation people had around that was that they were kind of equivalent and kind of lateral moves could happen between, and compensation was the same across the two. And that wasn't a useful construct. That wasn't the intention. So it created a lot of confusion and people thinking about switching between director to staff engineer and vice versa. And so that created a lot of confusion internally. So it's very important that I think with the tracks that you're explicit of what they mean relative to each other, and you explain what you intend to have between the two. And then the second one was that in the way that mediums figure this out, there are a lot of the things that are considered extracurriculars in most rubrics, like interviewing, mentorship, evangelism, that we really cared about, but they weren't represented in the rubrics. And so whenever you find yourself thinking about, like, are we rewarding the right behavior? Are people being recognized for their kind of well-rounded capabilities, that you make sure that maps to the rubric and that your rubric's being used for those things.
So having both tracks valued equally and value mentorship and support.
Yeah.
Correct?
Our biggest mistake is that we waited too long
Waited too long.
to roll it out. Yeah. So Medium's been around about 5 years now.
How many
And
engineers?
How many years? 5.
How many engineers at the
Oh,
time?
like 40.
40?
40-ish. And we just rolled it out about 6 months ago.
Okay.
And so there was a long period of time where engineers were kind of in this, like, I don't know what to do next.
Okay.
I don't know how to progress, because we didn't have levels, we didn't have titles, we didn't have any of that. At the end of the day, we did the right thing because we took our time to make sure it's right. But just like software, we probably should have started with something simpler and iterated.
Okay.
Right? Like what we have now is certainly not perfect, and we are going to iterate, but I would have liked to have seen it earlier.
Start early.
Let's see. So one thing we've kind of corrected as well. I think it's easy when you start off writing your levels to have it be a management function. So the kind of managers get in a room and you're like, let's write down what the IC career ladder looks like. And I think the big mistake there is not getting engineers involved very, very early. So our first version of the ladder was written by, like, I wrote it with a couple other managers, and we were like, here's our engineering IC ladder. Here's what being an IC is like. Which, as you can imagine, if you're an IC engineer, you kind of get handed this letter written by the management team, and maybe doesn't resonate, it doesn't feel like the right thing. And so when we refreshed the ladders, we actually had engineering ICs take over and essentially rewrite the entire ladder through a very kind of great, like, facilitative, kind of open, collaborative ladder rewriting exercise. So the person who was in charge of refreshing the ladder, she surveyed a bunch of engineers, she did interviews, she kind of categorized a lot of efforts, and that solved the other problem that you guys both raised, which was including a breadth of activities. So through her efforts, it included things like mentoring new hires for their first few months, which was a thing that took a lot of time from engineers, but we didn't include it in the ladder the first time around. So that was definitely one thing we changed. I think the other is trying to capture enough breadth in the ladder. So maybe the answer is actually to have 16 different tracks. And I think for us right now, some of the rubric bullets are kind of like really deep expert in area Y, or really great at accomplishing things across a range of X, right? So it's kind of trying to capture the depth and the breadth, but it's really, that bullet is really just being like really, really good. And then we try to include a large range in each point of the rubric. So that's something that they're working on now, and I think it will look something like breaking it apart into different tracks.
So we actually had two problems. One, when we implemented this track, and when people moved from IC to being a manager, we used to give them letters saying, hey, this person is promoted, congratulations. Like, no, a big no-no. If you have two career ladders, stop calling it a promotion when people move from one side to the other side. It's a lateral move a lot of times, so we have to be explicit. The second thing was we rolled this out, but we didn't explain what it takes to get from one level to another. So what we're doing now is sort of laying out a plan saying each of these tracks have 4 basic foundations: mastery, teamwork, influence, and impact. So at each of these levels, it's how much mastery do you have, how deep do you know your systems, what's your teamwork, how much influence you have on your team members, your peers, cross-functional teams, and then what impact are you causing for the company. So those are the 2 issues.
Okay, so same thing, actually, equally value the 2 tracks, right? Interesting. Thank you very much for sharing honestly those. Actually, you were talking about rubrics. Is it something that's public? Can you share with them some of the rubrics you have? So obviously, at Medium, it's public. Might not be for you, but if you can share with me, I will share with them what are the rubrics. It might be really helpful. So my third topics would be about different stage, different career ladder. So what is What is different? What is different at 30 engineers than 200 engineers than the early stage startup with a few engineers? So what is different? Is the career ladder changing? What is, you've been seeing at Box, how many engineers? 500? I was talking with Jeff, I think it's 500.
It's close to 400.
400, and at Checker 40.
Yep.
So really, you joined Stripe at 70 engineers, right? And you are now 300. What changed?
Yeah, so also for context, I mean, it sounds like you guys also saw a ton of growth. I was at Facebook from 200 engineers to about 4,000 engineers, so I also saw a much bigger change there. So at Stripe, I would say, actually kind of thinking about the ladders, I think the big thing is there are a lot more company building activities that get added to an engineer's responsibility as you grow. So when you're small, there's not as much of a structured onboarding program. Maybe you're not doing quite as many interviews per week. You're not, doing a lot of more like mentoring and kind of writing documentation or educating the rest of the engineering org. So today with 300 engineers, a big part of the role is actually writing new interview questions, kind of shadowing new interviewers, teaching different classes to other people, or writing, kind of documenting new projects, system diagrams, and stuff like that. So I think the activities do change the larger you get. Similarly at Facebook, I think it just meaningfully changed by the end. I think one thing that also happened with the ladders at Facebook was the sheer breadth of them. So I think in the beginning it was a pretty simple, like every rubric was like an or clause. You can kind of do this range of things, and over time it greatly differentiated into what looked probably more like a dozen or so different types of tracks and projects. So I think they just get more specific and they focus a lot more on company building.
The thing I saw was that when you're a smaller company, in terms of the diversity and the different types of people that you have, both on the management and and engineer track, is pretty sparse. Like you don't have all the different types of engineers that you're going to have as you grow. And so there's a temptation to potentially overcorrect or overtrain your rubric to the types of people that you have right now, and not leave space for iteration and kind of the diversity and the different types that you'll have as you grow. You get more specialized, you get more breadth, you get more depth. So it's important to think about the rubric as something that's evolving as you grow, and realize that early on you don't want to overtrain your rubric to the people that you have, because that can cause problems where you're only hiring kind of one style or one type of manager or engineer, and that will kind of cause problems down the road because you'll miss out on the benefits of the diversity there.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like the rubric needs to be built for where you want to go, not where you are now. Like 16, I don't know if that's the right number for medium. It's probably a little too much now, but where we want to go, we feel like there's going to be this breadth of stuff that people need to do, because we want to do a lot more hiring. We want to build more processes. We want to build out more orgs. We want to build out more locations. At Salesforce, we screwed this up. We just had 2 tracks, and that's it. And it was like your classical kind of like, you're an IC, you go up, or you're a manager and you go up. And what we failed to do is change it over time, as we went from like 100 engineers to 1,500 engineers when we were doing entirely different things. And so doing it based on where you want to go, not where you are, is key.
Thank you. We still have 15 more minutes for questions. So first questions. We talk about providing multiple tracks for growth, IC versus management, but the market seems to value one over the other in terms of money. Which one and why? It's not mine.
Well, I have a perspective on that. A lot of times people feel that monetary-wise, if you become a manager, director, VP, it's a lot better than in an IC track. But this is one thing I tell all my engineers and managers, that think about it. If you're managing a team and you want to hire this really senior person, you should be willing to pay top dollars to get that person, because you know that that person will help you solve problems. So I've had managers who manage people who make more than them. I have managed people who make more than me. So I don't think, I think there's a general perception in the market, but I think it is not true if you really follow what you want to do.
Yeah, that's a myth.
But that has been
Agreed.
one of the mistakes you mentioned, right? Having one of the track more value than the other.
So for us, it wasn't the value of the difference. It's just like comparing them side by side and thinking that they're like things you switch between at all the levels, all the way to the top. But in compensation, both at Box and Checker, it was very clear that you can make as much money as whether you're on the engineering track or the management track. And I've also had people on my team that have made more money than me, and so have all my managers on my team. So it's about the skills and the impact, and it's whether it's 2 tracks or 16, you need to value the impact of those skills correctly, and assign that value to that, and pay fairly for those. And so one of the skills as a manager is to think about that, and that's kind of one of the things I think we all have in common, is that you can actually earn equally based on your impact on both tracks, all the way to the top.
How many at Checker are in the management track versus IC track?
We have 6 people on the management track.
And all the other on the IC track?
Yes.
And you have people on top of the IC track equally paid and the one at the top of the management track?
So at Box we did. At Checker we don't, because we don't have as senior people on the engineering track yet. But certainly at Box we were at 300 to 400 people, and we had people that were like VP level on the engineering track that were making as much as other VPs. So.
I think there's one interesting thing about this question, because I agree, when you look at a company, within a company and you have your ladders, it's definitely possible for ICs to be paid more, and in fact there should be this kind of equal track as you progress. But I think there's something interesting about external hiring. It's a bit of a selection bias thing. So I think for one, the number of times you're hiring managers in externally is not 100% of your managers at a company. And so the set of folks who are joining companies as managers often do tend to be more experienced and may come in at higher levels as managers. So you kind of do end up seeing maybe a phenomenon if you were trying to average across some population of external hires. But I think there's a reason for that. I also think it's very hard to land often in a new company as an externally hired manager. And so there's, in some ways, there's some risk with these hires. And so I do think on average, probably the seasoned external manager maybe comes in with a higher offer than sort of the average engineering IC.
Yeah, they have better knowledge of the salaries too for that level.
What is your advice to founders of early stage pre-seed startup to build an engineering team when resources are scarce? You were a founder, right?
Yeah, so
Thomas at some point too.
If you're pre-seed, you don't have any money, so you got to sell them on vision.
Pre-seed.
Yeah, you got to sell them on the vision. You got to get them excited. You got to get them to believe that you're working on something that's really big, and they're working on a problem that they really want to solve.
Does it work?
It does work. One of them's in here. She was at my startup.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
So why do you join him? What's the vision? What was the vision? Was it big? Big vision? Cool.
Yes. She said yes.
She said yes? I didn't see it. Cool.
I would say that this is a very common problem, and it's definitely something that's very frustrating. The advice I would give is be patient and work hard and get the right people. I think especially in early stage, the wrong person can cause a lot of churn and spin. And even some of the people I've talked to on Plato as a mentor, I've seen some of the effects of that. So be patient, but also work hard. Don't just wait for it. Work really, really hard. This is one of the most important investments you're making for your vision. So be careful, work hard, and take time. You don't have to do like the 4-hour interview or 5-hour interview when you're early stage. I've seen a lot of early startups that do things like work trials and other things that are more innovative to make sure that the right person is joining their team.
Take your time. I should have talked to you a few years ago. Anything else? For the companies like Stripe that have private levels, how do you make sure engineering compensation is calibrated throughout the engineering organization?
So a lot of time goes into it, is kind of the short answer. A lot of time from both the engineering management team across the organization, HR, compensation team. So in every case where you might be influencing someone's compensation, basically a lot of review and calibration goes into it. So for every external hire, we actually have a centralized review that takes a look at the interview performance and their experience and references when applicable, and tries to level them according to how we see the rest of the current engineering org. Same goes for performance review cycles.
Thanks. Should we decouple career ladders from compensation? If so, why and how? Good question. Rondal, you have an answer?
So I think for a lot of people, career ladders are, the problem they're solving is setting expectations for the team and your expectations around performance and skills that you're bringing to the team. And so I think that's also consistent with what the goals are for compensation. So I think it would be very hard to decouple it unless you changed what career ladders mean. Because if you're setting expectations fairly and transparently, and you're paying fairly and transparently, those two things are part of solving the problem in terms of how you recognize and set expectations for your team.
I should have started with that question, actually. What's the purpose of the career ladder? Is it only for compensation, or?
Well, I would say it's for setting expectations.
Yeah.
So if you set expectations correctly and people are meeting those expectations, then you obviously want to make sure you're paying fairly for those expectations.
And what you, Thomas, when I talked to you last week, you wanted to make sure at Checker to build a career ladder that is not something you see every 6 months. It's something that we try to embody every day when we are working, right? So is it about the expectation thing you are mentioning?
Yeah, so for us it's really important. I think I've seen a lot of places where rubrics are something that are in a wiki, or it's a document that's rarely accessed even by managers. And that's one of the mistakes we made at Box. So how do you make sure that the rubric is something that's used and something that is actually providing value? So for us, one tangible example of that is making sure that, going back to the hiring question, one of the problems I saw was that it was easier to get higher in the ladder by interviewing at a company than it was internally to get promoted. And so that's a common problem because you're spending 4 hours on the interview. And so you could imagine people on the team that could pass the interview for the higher level. And so how do you make sure that your rubric is translating into your interview experience and the questions you're asking in a way that's consistent with your promotion process internally, and making sure you're connecting those two? So that's just one example of how to make the rubric something that's a living piece of the organization and not something that's static and kind of forgotten in the background.
Thanks. I love the next one. What do you think about the title tech lead? So it's kind of in between management and tech. What's your experience with that title? What are your thoughts?
I think they're nothing but problem solvers, as what Randall said. Essentially, tech lead is a senior most person on the team who can solve, not problem solver, but problem finder, who can find problems and solve it.
Yeah, for us, it's not a title, it's a role. And your role can change over time. So a particular project, you might be a tech lead, and that tech lead could be an IC, who's more focused on IC stuff, or they can be a group lead, which is an engineering manager. And we actually have a separate track just for project management, and that is specifically earning points in the tech lead role, which is like, pointing stories and following up on tasks and running the sprint meetings and that kind of stuff.
One thing I'll add too is that roles tend to be instruments you use for ownership and decision making. So it's a way to manage projects and make sure that you have clear decision making, which is one of the common problems. And so titles don't tell you anything about decision making, or at least in most places, rubrics and titles don't tell you that, and that's where roles come in. So you definitely want to have the roles, responsibilities, and ownership mapped out so you can make decisions quickly in your organization. And that's very similar to what I've done and used before as a role.
Two more, one more. Should compensation across the company be public?
Well, the range can be public.
The range?
Like each of these levels have different ranges. So, and it's already, I mean, it's already public outside the company. So it all depends on how you treat it inside. So it's not like people don't know at their level what they should be making. So the way I see it, it's the range can be public.
Brian?
Yeah, our levels are tied exactly to compensation. So in a sense, it is public. We actually played around with the idea, well, why not just call your level, instead of a 3.1, 155? Because it's the same thing, and anyone could just do the mapping. It's like just an enum back to the salary. Problem is, like, our CEO doesn't want his salary public. That's okay. So yes, I think they should be public.
Is it public at Stripe?
No.
No.
I think so. I think the challenge with compensation being public, and this is just my personal opinion. I think right now, I think we're in a really interesting time with compensation in engineering roles. So there's a lot of things happening. I think there's kind of a lot going on with startups, and equity is a hard thing to value. And I think most companies that even do share public salaries don't share public equity grants. So there's a little bit of just like a large amount of compensation that's hard to really evaluate across companies. I think there's a lot of movement in the current salary bands for engineering. So I think while in some ways it's hard to peg a certain number because maybe due to market rates, a year from now, the same level might get a different salary. There's also a ton of remote work happening. So new markets, we just opened an engineering office in Dublin. We have an engineering office in Seattle. A lot of our engineers are here or work remotely. And so there's so much complexity in how to think about fair compensation across all these changing variables that I think for a fast growth company, it's honestly been a bit simpler to keep it private so that we can adjust ourselves internally rather than having it sort of being a public thing that we have to keep updating. But I also think it's a bit of a unique time right now, and I think IBM is the one that is famous for having their like public salaries, and I think my assumption is that they didn't move as much for a while during IBM's time at that scale. But for us, like according to market, according to equity, there is a decent amount of movement in the industry that we're trying to follow.
Yeah, I also think there are different expertise levels. Like for data engineers and data scientists and architects, maybe it's different tier compared to maybe mobile engineers or UI engineers. So it becomes a very complicated problem. So maybe this is a use case that we could probably argue that we should decouple career levels and compensation because of such variations.
Thomas, public, private?
I would say the two kind of values here are around fairness and transparency. And this public compensation is a way to hold yourself accountable as a management team to those two values. So I would say always try to be uncomfortable and stretch yourself in terms of how public and transparent you can be there. But there's lots of problems to solve with full salary transparency. I think, honestly, we're moving in that direction with Glassdoor. There's a lot of people that are sharing their salaries publicly in different applications and things like that. So we're moving in that direction. It's better to be as ahead of that as you can as a company. So I'm more on the public side, but there are side effects to full public. And there's a great Planet Money episode about this where they studied this concept that I really like that showed kind of some of the bad side effects when you go full public all the time in a public spreadsheet where you can look up everyone at any time.
Buffer.
Yeah. Who think the compensation should be public? Private? Huh. It's much more balanced than that.
It depends on how much money there is to go around.
Right. Right. Thank you very much for all your thoughts. It was great. Thank you very much.